Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and this is a very short podcast that you're going to hear now as Lewis and I took a little road trip to Brighton to interview Terry Virgo. A real privilege and a really exciting week for the Church Office to get to spend a couple of hours with Terry and Wendy, talking about ministry, talking about behind the scenes. We loved talking about Nigel and Terry's relationship and just different complementary gifts, and so a real great opportunity for us just to sit and learn from a very experienced pastor, somebody who's led a huge movement and sort of influenced the church in the UK and served churches right across the world. So really looking forward to that podcast coming out in the next few weeks, and here's a little reflection from me and Lew driving home from Brighton.
There's a bit of ambient noise because I'm in a car travelling at a bang on 70 miles an hour. Well done, Gavin Smith. Gav, where are we and what we're doing? Where are we and what are we doing?
We are on the M4 motorway.
Yep.
Heading back to Wales.
Yes.
After a little cheeky road trip.
Yeah, we don't get to do these half as much as we would like. We're not in the car alone either. We've got Justin Gray in the car and Zach Smith. But obviously you know that Zach Smith's in the car because there's no way that Gav and I could do this sort of technology without some help. Gav, why are we on a road trip?
Well, we got a little invitation, didn't we, to go and interview and spend a couple of hours with Terry Virgo. So
yeah, Terry Virgo, founder of New Frontiers, man in his 80s now, but wow, still full of gospel life and wisdom and joy, and we spent a few hours with him. Really, we had lunch with him, and I got to sit with him and Wendy and hear them tell stories about planting churches and seeing a movement born.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, the church office did a podcast with him, and the church office is very well supported by Nigel Ring, which had been Terry Virgo's number two in one way for many, many years. I think they worked together for over 45, 50 years. And Nigel kindly set up a kind of interview with Terry just to kind of support the work of ministry that we're doing, kind of behind the scenes work. So it was exciting to kind of just put some questions, find out a little bit about Nigel's relationship with him, how they work together, how he's developed teams, and he's been very good, isn't he, at drawing different gifts and different people in, and there's been lots of fruit, I think, with New Frontiers. Yeah,
and I love there were real consistencies in our approach to ministry, our being Christchurch, and what Terry has built and seen through New Frontiers, that we can't do this alone. The Lord has given us one another to play a part in building the church together, and that was encouraging. And then once you guys were done chatting about his perspective on church administration and the role administrators play in church leadership, I sat down with Terry and we did more of a biographical story of his life, hearing about his conversion, hearing about how the Lord called him to, or how he ended up planting a church, really, and then how he saw a movement born. It was really thrilling to be able to listen. It was quite challenging in some ways because of his the descriptions of charismatic gifts and stuff is different to our approach, I guess, and so that was quite challenging, and I was glad to ask him some more questions about that, but challenging and stretching in a really healthy way, and now we're driving back. Gav, whilst we've got a few minutes, would you tell me how was the last? So for those of people who are listening in who don't know anything about the church office, we've done a previous podcast where we introduced the church to the church office. But for presuming that we've heard that, how has the last year been? How has gospel ministry been in and through the church office?
Yeah, it's good. We've seen numbers of people coming onto the site growing from over 130 different countries that are engaging with the material. We've done 65 podcasts and hit a kind of target, kind of milestone of 10,000 downloads, which is lovely and
Is that a lot?
encouraging. It feels like a lot.
Yeah, it's
I
a
don't
big
know
number,
if it's a
isn't it?
lot compared to other podcasts, but
Justin and Zach were just teaching me who KSI was whilst we were having lunch in that food in that service station. So I don't know whether KSI would be impressed with those numbers, but it sounds a lot to us.
So I think the broad reach is growing. I think there's the more and more we talk about the work of ministry behind the scenes, the more we seem to be able to connect with people who are either in those roles, who are struggling or who are finding challenges, whether it be financial, whether it be support, whether it be just challenges within leadership teams. There's a whole host of different
relational
experiences, relationship stuff, and then the church office has been able to go and support and serve 4 or 5 churches directly, whether it be support them with policy or just a bit of advice, or come alongside them just for a bit of confidence with pastors saying, how do I manage this in my church? What are your perspective on that?
So of all the things that you do, like producing the documents or making the documents available for others, you do consultancy, you do problem solving, you do some firefighting. Which part of the church office's work do you get most excited about? You can see probably because you can see the gospel connection, you can see the gospel grabbing hold of people quickest. What?
It's great to meet people who are in the role, similar to I am, who haven't made the connection to the practical work of ministry and how that has a spiritual effect on the church, how that supports the gospel, how it provides the support for ministries to work. So it's great to help people draw the line to go, actually, you're making a huge difference. You may not realize it, but what you bring and contribute is actually of huge value, and you have to see it through those gospel lens. So this is gospel ministry, and so lots of people who are starting to go, okay, I see this connection, and I think they're getting fresh joy, fresh desire in it. I know, speaking to some of their leaders, they're seeing just a newness and a freshness about their staff, which is encouraging. I think we've got pastors that are valuing it in a greater way, are certainly asking more questions, and the big question that keeps coming back and again is how do you find someone in your church with a gift of administration? How do you know
I think that was my next. I was going to ask you about that because I don't think it probably wouldn't take you very long to convince a pastor that he needs that the church needs an administrator. I think most pastors would say, well, I know that. The next question is, where do I find one? And that I know that is something that you told me that you're keen to play a part in helping, aren't you? Tell us about that.
So we'd love to see some training developed. We're talking about interns being available to come to the church and just see something different modeled. Pete has always in our church had somebody in a kind of operational role. So before me it was Toller and Rachel Smith. If you go back even longer, for those who've been around longer, you'll know her name and the difference that those two made in the church. So Pete has always recognised the need for it and recognised his own weaknesses and how he needs support in those areas. And so it is a joy to sit with the pastor and say, well, where are there gaps in the areas of the church that need sorting out or need some structure? And you're right, pastors know they need help, but they just don't know where to, or they've had a bad experience where they've appointed someone they thought was going to be really good and help them, and then it's just gone bad. And I think even again, talking to Terry, just how important character was one of the things he kept saying, wasn't it? When you're looking for people to work with you, you want men and women of great character. They don't have to be the most excellent, the most proficient, but people who love the church, who love the gospel, great character, who capture something of where you're going, wasn't he? And that was one of the lovely things that came away from chatting to Terry, is that this is a group of churches who are kind of on the move, is how they may describe it. To take this gospel out, not just to neighbourhoods or locals or city, but global.
Yeah.
And internationally, they do so much work, don't they, across different churches, and he's brought on different people into his team at different times with different gifting, and as challenging as that can be sometimes to find people that are different to you, that think different, that challenge you along the way. Actually, there's real benefit in having those different gifts present.
At the end of our time, so a very long story short, Terry's ministry starts. Gav, you watch that speed? You've exceeded 70 miles an hour there. Terry's ministry starts in a town called Seaford, which is about 30 miles from Brighton, and then from that little place in Seaford comes, just a move. He's able to see a move of the Spirit, which inspires men and women to go not just across the country with planting churches as the gospel is planted in people's hearts and lives, but across the world. And we were just talking about, like, he said he was in Seaford yesterday. Him and Wendy were there yesterday, and just recollecting the grace of God to them. And that isn't, and it isn't so. To spend time with him, it isn't so much a chance to spend time with a great man of God or it's nothing like that. It was just a chance to listen to a man who said, I've seen God do marvelous things, and I believe that God can continue to do marvelous things in this generation and beyond, and it was a real privilege. So the Church Office podcast will be out next week with Terry?
Hopefully. We'll get it out, listen back to it, and kind of pick out some bits so we can go, right, let's make a couple of short videos, and obviously the longer podcasts that people are interested in. So I think it was lovely the way he kind of honoured Nigel Ring and his work behind the scenes. That was nice to see and hear. So the podcast will be out, and then we'll look forward to the two that you sat down with him. And
one long conversation that we're going to have to split into two, but it was just too good. It was just too lovely to listen to him, and so we'll put that out.
So what's your takeaway from today?
My takeaway from today is how sort of gloriously unimpressive he is. So I'd never met Terry before. I've read a bunch of his books. I reread one of his books last week in preparation for it. And when you only know somebody through his books and through his preaching, they can become, in your mind, massive. And his influence is staggering upon me. But then when I meet him, he's very down to earth. He's very disarming. He wonderfully is pretty unimpressed with himself. But you get drawn, don't you, to a man who you get drawn to faith, and that was my takeaway. I spent time with a man who has faith in a God that can do wonderful things. And I hope that comes across in the podcast. We may release it next week.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Church Office podcast. Keep an eye out in the next couple of weeks for that podcast with Terry Virgo. Really, really enjoyed doing it and learned so much, and I hope the conversation will be a blessing to you as well. So check out the website. There's documents and other podcasts with a whole range of topics that we hope will serve pastors, will serve administrators. So please check out the site and get in contact if we can serve you in any way.